Now, to end the keynote, we get Mr. Chuck Mies, who's a phenomenal presenter with Autodesk, longtime supporter of CFTA. Come on up. Yeah. So, oh, he's already got you all loaded. I love working with you guys. Like, you make it so easy.
And there's my timer.
Yeah, so Chuck, when was your first CFTA conference?
George and I met at 2008 at the first conference in '08. Yeah, we were both there together. That's when we met together, and that's when I've been working with the CFTA since. So,
I think everybody in the world knows Chuck. I really do. I mean, everyone I've ever talked to.
Frightening.
I have a huge corporation that is Autodesk Global, and they say, you know Chuck Mies? Like, it's kind of crazy. So we're very fortunate that you took time out of your schedule. Like, we really do. This is time. And so thank you for coming and for doing your thing that you do so well.
You can't walk off the stage yet, so stand up here.
I don't like this.
Yeah. So, come here. I really want to take the opportunity. Like I said, I've been involved in every conference since 2008. And under Michelle's leadership, the acceleration of the CFTA, along with the board, and you look at the conference environment we have here today, I want to give you a big, you've been a pleasure to work with as a you make it a pleasure to work with, so we've been having this whole discussion around the year of the deliverable, right? We've talked about this. Michelle's mentioned it a few times. It all came out of the Unconference at last year's event in Madison, because we sat down at a table and everybody wanted to talk about BIM deliverable guidelines. And as we iterated through this, and I watched the listserv at the beginning of the year, saw this topic come up a couple times, I thought to myself, there's a need here. Right? So I approached Michelle about the idea of let's put together a series. And what I want to do today is recap the series, but most importantly, help you understand how do you get started from here, right? What are the next things that you're going to do, and how do you get started in this whole journey? So we started with the first webcast in June. That was about BIM requirements, why you need to have them. And then we did a deeper dive on Tuesday into BIM requirements. We had another session in July about model QC tools, how you actually do quality control on your models, make sure you're getting what you're asking for. And we did a deeper dive here on that also. And then yesterday there was actually a case study where our partner CAD Microsystems presented with Ohio State and Western Michigan on how they're actually using all of these tools along with their guidelines, etc. So we've given you a lot of information, but the biggest thing that I want you to understand right now is that this is a journey. BIM deliverables are not a destination. It's a process you're going to go through, and you're going to continually go through. And I always say there's 3 stages in the BIM deliverable process. This is the first stage. I saw this look on a lot of people's faces in the pre-conference sessions. It's like, oh my, how do I even get started on this? That's very natural. That means you understand the scale, that means you understand the scope, and you're really trying to address this. But for those of you who transition out of this phase, here's where you're going to go. Okay? And it's going to get difficult, and it's going to get frustrating. And you're going to deal with things in your BIM deliverable process you never thought you were going to deal with. You're going to deal with contracting people who don't want to change your contracts. You're going to deal with, do I do this as a contract? Do I do it as an addendum? There's a lot of things that happen. But if you persevere and you stick through it, our goal is to get you to be this person, right? But it's important to understand you may go through these 3 stages multiple times, right? Your BIM guidelines will develop and mature over time. And what I want to help you understand is a few key things that you have to remember as you start to go down this process. The first one is the idea of creating a set of deliverable guidelines is a process. It's not a destination. It's not a document. It's a process. And you have to understand that your guidelines will evolve over time. But the most important understanding that I've gotten from working with almost 150 owners over the last 10 years is you have to get started. I tell this story, and this is very true. I worked with a large healthcare organization for 3 years that debated about the best set of BIM deliverable guidelines. And I kept saying, let's just do something. Well, we got to get this right. We got to get this right. In those 3 years, they brought several $100 million of capital projects online with no BIM deliverable guidelines. What opportunity was lost? If they would have started with something small and let it iterate through those major capital projects, look at where they could have been at the end of 3 years, instead of still, and to my knowledge, still have not put a set of guidelines on the street because they're still arguing about what the guidelines need to be. Most important thing you have to do is you have to convince people within your organization that this is worth doing, right? So what are some of the end results? What are some of the things that we've seen out of customers and companies that have done this? The first example, and the best example I can still give to this day, was the project we worked on way back in 2012 with Maricopa County, where through a set of BIM deliverable guidelines and a prototype integration with IBM Maximo, we were able to save Maricopa County 2 staff years of data entry when they brought their courthouse online. By capturing the information through the modeling process, validating it, and pushing it directly into Maximo, we saved them 2 staff years of data entry on a 500,000 square foot courthouse. Another really solid example came from Carolina's Health Systems. You've heard Ohio State and some others talk about converting from AutoCAD floor plans to building information modeling. Carolina's Health Systems actually documented what that meant to them. With the same space management platform, simply changing from AutoCAD drawings connected to that space management platform to Revit models connected to that space platform, they doubled their productivity. They went from 5,000 square feet an hour to 10,000 square feet an hour because of how much easier it is to classify and quantify space within a building information model. This is how they justified, in 12 months, converting their AutoCAD drawings to lightweight walls, doors, windows, floors, Revit models. For the first year, space requirements alone. And the best example, or another really good example, very close to here, would be Xavier University. In fact, I'm going to give a shout out to the folks from Messer Construction who are here, who this was their case study, and they actually did the integration with FM Systems, who was also here. We pushed 50,000 data elements on 4 buildings directly into FM Interact at the completion of that project. I have one adage in my life, and that is opportunity. You should always be seeking opportunity, and I define opportunity very specifically. All right? Don't ask someone what hurts, because pain is only interest. Ask them how much it costs them to hurt, because quantifiable pain is opportunity. Right? If our elbow hurts and Serena Williams' elbow hurts, we both have the same pain, but guess who's more materially invested in fixing their elbow? It's not me. Right? What does it cost you to hurt? And these are some of the numbers. So how do you get started? It's kind of overwhelming. I break it down into what I call the 3 questions. The 3 questions aren't something revolutionary. They're really pretty straightforward. It's really about who, what, and how. The who, and this is the most important question, is who is going to use the data. Because until you take the time to understand who is going to use the data, what problem are you trying to solve? I see this happen everywhere. We need a set of guidelines. We need a set of guidelines, and nobody's talked about that. I'll get a lot more in detail of that. After you figure out who's going to use the data, then you just move on to what data we're going to collect and how. That's how you define the solution. Because if you have somebody in mind, now you can architect a solution for their problem. And the last question, which is probably the most important one, is how will the data be validated and maintained? Because without this question being answered, why even go down the path at all? Right? So let's get a little more detailed into the 3 questions. Who's going to use the data? It's really all about those final consumers in your organization. Do you really understand them, right? People live in silos, and that's not a bad thing, but what I usually tell people is you have to learn how to think inside other people's silos or ask them to trade you. The worst mistake you can make is assuming, and I'm an architect, assuming that architects, engineers, and contractors know what you need to manage a facility. Well, you don't. You pay us to design and construct facilities. We're not facilities managers. We don't understand what you do. You need to help us understand that. You need to directly understand what they need in the way of data at handover, and most importantly, if not, what problem are you trying to solve? Again, We got to solve somebody's problem. It's really about understanding these people. Some examples I've seen of formal persona development would be University of Southern California and Turris, the work Turris did for Baylor, where they actually went out and defined personas. And the information we got as a technology group out of that was tremendously valuable. Our maintenance people needed O&M manuals, location, repair instructions, and our commissioning person was really worried about, is the university really receiving all the necessary information? Is there a process to validate that? And if we wouldn't have taken the time to talk to these people, we wouldn't have had the opportunity to truly understand what they were after. Now we have a problem. That problem could be the maintenance manager, it could be the reimbursement analyst, it could be the space manager, it could be the MEP maintenance technician. Now we have a problem. Let's solve the problem by thinking about what data we're going to collect and how. The important things you have to start to understand, and this is the key takeaway, quit thinking as built and start thinking as maintained. Those are two very different things. An as-built model is a record construction document for what happened at a specific point in time and may or may not be compatible with what you're going to use to manage a facility. Separate those. As-built documentation is very important. You want it, you want to capture it, but that may not be what you use to manage a facility. The second thing you want to think about is what are the specific data? Now you go talk to the people. And here's what happens. As people iterate through this conversation, we see it over and over again. The amount of data that you're trying to capture decreases fairly dramatically. Because if you look at somebody's CMMS system, they have a lot of fields. But if you start to talk to them about that, and I'm going to use an example from Western Michigan, Devon, I'll give a shout out to you guys, because you did this very well. They brought everybody in the room, and they sat down and they said, okay, what are we going to put in our models? And by utilizing their seasoned maintenance people, they made the decision that if we touched it more than once a year, correct? That was the drawing line, more than once a year, it was going to be in our models. Well, guess what? Now we're only supporting 12 asset classes. So from everything on the university scale, we immediately dropped back to 12 asset classes. Then we iterated through on those 12 asset classes and came up with 20 common parameters across those 12 asset classes that would solve the personas that Western Michigan was trying to solve. How many of you can wrap your head around the idea of 20 attributes on 12 asset classes as part of a handover document, right? Much simpler than the guy who prints out his Maximo page and says, here's my 162 fields, right? Does he use them? I don't know. Let's figure it out. But you also have to start thinking about the idea of how you're going to collect the data and acknowledge the fact that data comes from different stakeholders at different parts of the process along the way. And you have to think about, how am I going to bring this together and what stakeholder can best capture that data? Here's a very simple example, and where's my Asa Ablo guys? I did not know you were presenting before me. What's this example, right? We're going to use a door as an example. So if you think about a door, right, you think about the information that's on a door in schematic design. Then as the door goes into design development, you capture more information. You get into construction drawings, you get a little more information. You get into the submittal process, you get all the hardware information, all the hardware sets, everything comes along and actually gets installed. The question you have to think about, and this is why I say it's not about technology, it's about a process, is how do I take those individual bits of information available at some place along the way and consolidate them into a data record that I want to capture. That is where technology helps. Technology is a catalyst, it's not the solution, right? The solution is you thinking through, what do I want, when is it available, and who can capture that information for me? Then we start moving on to the idea of what do we do with it, right? We have this information captured. How do we move it downstream? In many cases, a simple import and export can work. Maybe you just write out a spreadsheet and you suck it into a maintenance management system or a space management system, and that's all you do. That's good enough. You can also use richer formats and third-party formats like Kobe, right? If we need to start getting into more detailed exchanges, we can support workflows like that. And here's the big thing I want to point out. There are so many vendors these days that are pursuing integrations between our platform and their platform that you need to start looking at and understanding both direct integrations, such as Maximo, FM Systems, Archibus, Tririga, and those other systems that have direct integrations, as well as third-party integrations. One of our sponsors here was Igor with Ecodomus, who has a third-party integration. Start to think about ways in which you can take advantage of all of that to move that data downstream. So now we have a problem. The problem is Pete, the maintenance guy. We have a solution. We're going to give him 20 common attributes across 12 asset classes. How do we make sure it's validated and maintained? This really came to fruition. Is Craig Dubler still here from Penn State? Craig was in the room when Ed Gannon said this to me. Why would I trust the data just because it came from the model? What's your QA/QC process? Somebody can fat finger data into a model just as easily as they can fat finger it into a CMMS platform. Have to have a process to validate and understand what that data is. That's where we come in. So we've talked about these tools a lot. For those of you who aren't aware, this is a set of free utilities that my team provides into industry to help do things such as classification, validation, and that. So the first tool is the classification manager. It's really all about entering data. If you have a list of standard room names and you want your projects named with these standard room names, the classification manager allows you to create a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet and hand it to an A&E firm and say, use these names when you name my rooms. FICM codes. We just released a FICM database for the classification manager so you can classify spaces based on FICM. It's us providing the platform for you to use a tool as simple as Excel and create pick lists essentially so people are entering the information you want to see in your models. Then we need to validate it. And that's where the model checker and the model checker configurator come in. And this was the case studies that was shown yesterday with Western Michigan and Ohio State on how they're using the model checker to actually validate those models. Here's the big one. What's your plan on maintaining the data? Because if you're not going to maintain it, why capture it at all? Because the biggest thing that happens is as soon as the data is non-current, people quit trusting it. If you have 20 fields of data and you're only maintaining 12, guess what happens when a maintenance guy tries to use field 13 and finds out it's not current? He quits trusting fields 1 through 12 that are current. So you have to really think about this idea of how are we going to do it. And here's where the technology guy says the most controversial thing of the day, models don't always need to be updated. Separate how you maintain a model from how you maintain the attribution. And here's my point. You think about replacement of a pump. Let's use that as a classic example. A pump is an asset that occupies an asset location. The model should have the asset location, not the asset. So if in my maintenance process I have to replace the pump, what do? I take a CMMS platform, I go out, I retire the old asset, bring the new asset online, and then I assign the asset to the asset location. Does anybody need to update a model? No. There's still a pump in a mechanical room, in a system. You don't care. That should be managed by your CMMS platform. And if you think about it that way, now you have the ability to keep the data current and people are going to trust it and again, exploit those integrations. When we can push data back and forth between systems, now we can start to facilitate and create a lot better thing. So what you have to do now is go on a journey that I call process transformation. And if we go back to the 3 questions and we start thinking about what does this really mean, it's about the idea of, as far as who's going to use the data, you really have to go out and understand your end users, right? Who's going to ultimately use that data so we can understand them? Do you have to take the time to develop formal personas? No. Is it a good idea? Yeah, it's very helpful. But just understand, talk to them, right? And understand what they really do. As far as what data you're going to collect and how, that is where the webcast and the pre-conference session where we talked about BIM strategies, BIM standards, and then BIM project execution plans. Those are the documents that will actually help you answer the concept of what data you're going to collect and how will it be maintained. That's where the BIM interoperability tools come into play, the integrations come into play, but Here's the big thing: the right data from the right source. You've all heard the term the single source of truth, but what you probably haven't thought is the single source of truth does not reside in a single place. Okay? The model can be the single source of truth for the location data, but the attribution may have a single source of truth in the maintenance management system. The single source of truth does not reside in one place. It just has to be the single source. So, what are my final thoughts? As you start down this journey and you start working on your BIM deliverable guidelines, it's all about the people. You have to start there. But once you get started, you have to understand one thing, and I'm going to use a quote from my favorite inventor, Thomas Edison. And Edison said something that I've always remembered, and that is genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Maybe you're inspired, maybe you want to start down this path, maybe you want to create a set of guidelines. It's going to be a lot of work. But when you get to the end and you see some of the benefits that we've seen other organizations see and achieve, it will have been worth it. So, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Look at that. 47 seconds left.